Hello, all, and thank you for joining us today for a webinar session on good manufacturing practices. So this is our first webinar in a 7-part best-in-class series focused on building guidance and confidence for managing core food safety practices. So our instructor for the course is Mike Cramer of the Eurofins Advanced Learning Institute. Before I hand it over to Mike, I'd like to provide a quick overview on webinar logistics. So this webinar is being recorded. So the recording, along with the presentation slides, will be sent to all registered individuals within 3 business days. We are fully open to questions, so you can submit questions throughout the webinar. You can also, there's some emojis that you can kind of give us some thumbs ups or likes or whatever if you feel keen on doing that. We will be doing our best throughout the webinar to try and incorporate any questions that come in into the conversation. If we don't get to your question, there's plenty of time for us to follow up afterwards as well. So we hope to have a dynamic conversation. So there might be some polling questions throughout as well to encourage your participation some. Feel free to join in on that. And that's about it for logistics. So with that, Mike, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. And really looking forward to going through good manufacturing practices this morning. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've worked in the food industry for about 43 years before I retired a few years ago. But there are things that I have learned in that time that I hope will help us to be able to take a different look at how we implement good manufacturing practices to help with our operations. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and get started with the employee measures for effective food safety. Now, some of the things that I want to be able to cover today are what are good manufacturing practices. And I want to start with what the regulatory requirements are, documentation, expectations, and how they impact operational sanitation and food protection. How do we implement good manufacturing practices? And I have a slide in here that I'll refer to because I think it's an important statement about written procedures. Yes, we want to have written procedures, but unless we actually implement those, that includes documented training and education with our personnel, as well as monitoring for conformance, then the GMPs are just a book on the shelf that we really are not getting the full benefit from. And finally, I want to talk about why good manufacturing practices are vital to our industry. Obviously, prevention of food safety hazards and protection of consumers, as well as our customers, is extremely important for safety, also protecting the company reputation, and also reduction of regulatory control actions and scrutiny that sometimes comes along with food safety hazards. Now, when we talk about good manufacturing practices, and at this point, I'm going to refer to them as GMPs. I think we all know GMPs are good manufacturing practices. And I've heard this said from different food safety experts and regulators. Implementation of GMPs is one of the most effective means of preventing a food safety hazard, and that includes microbiological hazards, chemical hazards such as allergens, and physical hazards. And we'll talk a little bit about and break down how those can be implemented through the GMP process. Now, depending upon the industry that you're in, what segment of the industry you're in, they are requirements for both USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service operations, as well as FDA operations. So you may fall into one or both. You may be dual jurisdiction, but you will have some type of good manufacturing practice from a regulatory standpoint. There are expectations that we have for our employees, and I say employees, we really should talk about GMPs being expectations we have for anybody that enters our facility. Our employees, we have a lot of control over, but we have We can have people coming into our facilities that may not have been in a food manufacturing facility before. So we have to recognize that and make sure that we implement the GMPs with them for food protection purposes. And GMP implementation really helps us to maintain a sanitary operating environment. Now, we talk about, for example, the standard sanitary operating procedures if you're in a meat and poultry, USDA operation, the SSOPs. And one of the factors of that includes operational sanitation. Once you finish cleaning the plant, you start operations, maintaining that. This is true in FDA operations as well, maintaining conditions that will not result in a contamination or adulteration of food. So GMPs can help us maintain that by making sure we have practices that prevent hazards from occurring.
Hey, Mike, this
As
might
I
be a
go
good
through,
time
I
to
am
throw
going to
in.
reference the regulations. Now, one of the things that I learned early on in the industry was that it's a good idea to really go through and look at the regulations. What I would recommend is that if you ever have trouble sleeping at night, that's a really good time to look at these because they're boring as can be, but they'll, it's really important you understand. So if you start off, if you're a USDA or, an FSIS operation, a meat and poultry operation, you're going to be looking under 9 CFR 416.5. Now, one of the things about USDA is they don't have GMPs spelled out as much as FDA does, but they do cross-reference and they really rely on FDA regulations as expectations for the facility. But essentially, what we're talking about with USDA is personal cleanliness. That's people coming into the plant are going to be physically clean. They're going to have clean clothes, clean garments to start the day. If we're providing them with smocks, aprons, or other types of covering, they're going to be either made of cleanable materials or materials that can be disposed of. A lot of us use aprons or sleeves, especially for in ready-to-eat type operations. That we can dispose of at the end of the shift as they become soiled or torn or at the end of the day. And of course, disease control is something that is referenced by USDA, and that's personnel who appear to have or have an infectious disease, open lesions, boils. They are excluded from the operations because their condition may contribute to adulteration of products. So if you've got people that are coming in, and they have, obvious signs of a fever, obvious signs of, like a cut with an infection, we want to take precautions to make sure that they're not handling food or food ingredients. So we're going to exclude them from the process. Now, you're going to work with your HR department to make sure you understand what we can and cannot do legally, from that standpoint. But we don't want to put people in a position where they could potentially adulterate the food. From an FDA standpoint, you're going to be looking at 21 CFR. CFR is are the food regulations. In this case, 21 CFR 117. These are the good manufacturing practices, and these are spelled out very specifically in the Code of Federal Regulations. And if you look at what happened during FSMA, when FSMA was first implemented, these switched from 110 to 117. The regulations were rewritten. They go into a little bit more detail. And again, though they're FDA, these are actually really, really good examples of what we could be looking at for our operations. And again, they're looking at personnel who appear to have or have illnesses, lesions, sores, boils, almost the same wording that USDA uses, will be excluded if there's a reasonable possibility of contamination. And they will report these conditions. And we've got to make sure that our employees are confident that they can report these conditions. From a cleanliness standpoint, all personnel in contact with food will follow hygienic practices. And if you look at 21 CFR 117, it goes down through everything from personal cleanliness, hand washing, unsecured jewelry. This is one that's spelled out very clearly. head and hair covering. And what I like about this is they give you really some of the very basics, if you will. These would be the basis for your GMPs. Now we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as far as, hey, am I limited to these as far as GMPs? No, of course not. But you want to make sure that they fit with your type of operation. And one that comes to mind that we'll talk about is captive footwear. And we'll talk about that in another slide, but it is something that you want to consider. And of course, in this specific section 117, it does refer to preventing allergen cross-contact and microbiological contamination. Now, the FSMA regulations will get into those a little bit deeper as well. Allergens, this is one of the first times you start to see allergen cross-contact as a specific part of the regulations. But we do want to make sure that we include that in our GMPs, regardless of whether we're FDA or USDA. Now, if you're a USDA meat and poultry facility and all you are doing are you're doing cuts of meat or you're doing carcasses, you probably don't have allergens, but you really want to take a look at whether or not your operation could be impacted by allergens. Now, we'll be conducting the next webinar will be on food allergen management. So hopefully we'll see a lot of you there, especially if you are handling food allergen ingredients. I do want to discuss a little bit about whether or not we've got, active and effective food GMPs and programs and things like that in place. And what I have found is this quote from Frank Yanis when he was the FDA Deputy Commissioner for Food Policy, and I thought it was a really telling statement. Frank has been around a lot of years, been with industry and regulatory agencies. And I'm glad to see we've got some poll questions response as far as about 67–68% of you are making sure that both employees and visitors are trained and educated in the GMPs. This is really good because we do have people coming into our facility. If we're doing only employees, we may be missing opportunities as far as, if we've got sales personnel or contractors coming in. So I'd encourage us to make an effort to make sure all visitors, including regulatory personnel. The quote from Frank that I wanted to reference is, what I learned from years of experience on both sides of the fence, public and private, is that you can have the best science, the best documented food safety practices, policies, and rules in the world, but if they're not put into practice by people, they're useless. And I think that's a really great statement. So we want to make sure we do have written GMPs. With FDA, they are a preventive control requirement. So we do have to have that for FDA regulated foods. We want to make sure that they specify hygiene practices that are expected for all plant personnel. And this will include the plant office personnel. I actually had a question come up one time many years ago from an office person that said, hey, if I'm working in the office and I use the restroom, why do I need to wash my hands if I'm going to go into the facility and wash my hands there? And I didn't need to respond. The people who were in the meeting, they basically took care of the answer for that. But we want to make sure that it's not just that they understand what is expected, but why it is expected for them to follow these GMPs. Now, plans will include expectations for visitors. And again, this could be sales personnel, whether it's our own company sales personnel coming in, or maybe it's sales personnel from a vendor, from a supplier, from a packaging supplier. This may be customers that are coming through our facilities, and especially with customers, I want to make sure that I put them through the education process for GMPs, because I want to show them how focused important food safety is for us. Contractors, we have contractors coming in that may be doing work in our facilities. This may be demolition construction. This may be maintenance work on equipment. If they're doing maintenance work on our equipment, I think it's probably a given that they have been in a food facility before. But if they're contractors, they may not have. And we have to make sure that they understand the expectations that we have for protecting our products. And that starts with our GMPs. So if you want them to be covered with a smock, you make sure that they understand that they wear a smock. You don't want them chewing gum, make sure they understand you don't want them chewing gum. Now, we also want to make sure that we include regulatory personnel. And I've had the questions come up before, well, can I tell regulatory personnel, can I tell them they have to follow my GMPs? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And I can't remember where it is. I want to say it may be in Directive 5000 for FDA, 5001 for USDA personnel, but it basically says in there, USDA personnel will follow the GMPs of the plant, of the facility, the establishment that they're in. So yes, you can tell regulatory personnel what the expectation is. And I've had that come up before where I've done audits at suppliers, watched a local health inspection personnel, for the city come in, and they were wearing, earrings down here, and they were, wearing their hair nets so that the hair wasn't really covered, and, bracelets and necklaces and things like that. And I said to the QA manager at the time, I said, aren't you going to tell them to take those off? His response was, oh no, if I tell them to take it off, they'll only get mad and they'll write me up. I said, well, then write them up and then make sure that you respond in your report that, this was an expectation for food safety within the facility. You shouldn't be intimidated like that. You shouldn't allow people to intimidate you like that. But I understand the regulatory personnel, sometimes they try to wield a little more power and authority that they have. But it's really important that they follow our practices, because I'd hate to think that they contributed to a food safety hazard, possible loss of product, or even worse. Now, GMPs also support operational sanitation. It's an effective way of maintaining sanitary operational conditions in the facility. It can help us prevent operational food safety hazards, like I mentioned, microbiological, chemical, or physical. I'll repeat this when we get to the appropriate slide, but hand washing is one of the most effective ways to minimize microbiological challenges within the facility. A documented education on handling of allergens is one of the most effective ways of making sure we don't have allergen cross contact. And taking off jewelry, eliminating any jewelry is the best way to prevent physical hazards from occurring in the facility. If they don't have it on, it can't fall off into the product. We also know that GMPs can help us prevent safety, contribute to safety within the facility, prevent safety hazards that can occur. We talk about, never seen it happen, but I'm sure that it comes from experience, where people that have worn bracelets or people that have worn necklaces that get caught up in moving machinery can become injured. And so we want to make sure we eliminate all the possibilities of people possibly becoming injured in the facility. So, we can improve our safety for our employees by having them follow specific GMP practices. Now, how we implement GMPs is extremely important. And there are 5 steps that I want to cover here. And then I've got a quote from Albert Einstein, and I want to relate a little story about how this can be an effective process. The 5 steps I want to cover is, first of all, having written procedures that assure the prevention of food hazards and are in conformance with regulatory requirements. Now, I mentioned that especially in CFR 117. These are requirements. These are the shall. You will have these in place. You may have additional ones in place for your facility. So I want to start with the regulatory requirements are kind of like the foundation. They're the basics for food safety. But depending upon your type of operation, you may have additional GMPs that you include to prevent other hazards that are maybe different depending upon the category that you're in. So I want to start off with well-written GMPs, but I want to make sure that they're concise, they're specific, they're to the point. Then there is documented training. We talk about documented training. We have people come into a room and we say, here are the GMPs, and we read through them. That's fine, but I want to make sure that we do this in such a way that they understand these are expectations. And so when I talk about documented, I want a sign off. I want this to be a sign off that says, yes, I've learned this. Yes, I've read this. Yes, I understand what is expected of me, and failure to follow can result in additional consequences. So I want to make sure that that's very clear. And I want to include all production personnel. I want to include sanitation personnel. Our sanitation personnel are vital to the safe operations, food safe operations of our facility. Maintenance personnel, obviously they're out there in the facility, they're in contact with equipment, including direct contact surfaces. I want to make sure they understand expectations. Office personnel and quality personnel. Now this is a requirement for FSMA. You are required to have documented education processes for employees, and that's part of the assurance that they are qualified to perform their duties. If you look at the verbiage in FSMA, they do refer in a couple of spots to personnel who are qualified to perform duties. That can be something as simple as GMP training. Again, we talked about visitors. I want to make sure visitors are receiving this, and they will be advised of the expectations to follow while they're in the plant. This can be done, as they enter the facility. They go into the front office. Hopefully, they're checking in with somebody. It's explained to them that what is expected and that they're signing off. We want to make sure we have sign off that we can refer to. Now, it's also important that we have monitoring. It's not enough, and this is what I think Frank was also talking about in the quote that he gave. It's not enough that we tell people, here's what we expect. We really want to make sure that we are looking for conformance to the practices that we have identified so that we can document the conformance or document a nonconformance, which allows us to take corrections for nonconformances or for insanitary conditions and constantly make improvements in our facility. It's not enough that we have the program and that we monitor, but we've got to take that information and continually make improvements, whether that's rewriting the GMPs so that maybe they're a little bit easier to understand, or maybe it's including a GMP that we hadn't thought of before. Now, I like this quote from Albert Einstein. Setting an example is not the main means of influencing another. It is the only means. And I thought that was really telling, especially if you've had situations like this before. I was in one of the facilities a number of years ago, and the president of the company came to the facility, and he brought his wife with him. And so as we were, as the GM and the QA manager were getting people together to take them out to the facility, the QA manager said, now I'm going to need you to remove all jewelry, watches, earrings, rings, all of that. And the president's wife said, well, I don't want to take off my jewelry. It's a little bit expensive and I don't want to lose it. And the plant manager said, well, don't worry, I'll put it in the safe in my office. And the president of the company, in front of all these leaders in the facility, all these managers, supervisors, the GM of the facility, looked at her and said, it's important that we set the example. I'm the president of this company, and I need to make sure that I help set the example of conforming to food safety expectations. That to me was one of the most powerful. He was a person I really enjoyed working with anyway. But you know, he said, "I'm going to set the standard," and basically the message that he sent to all of these other personnel, all these other supervisors was, nobody's above the regulations. I'm going to follow it, and you all make sure. And the feedback we got later on was really very positive from the supervisors and the leads, and saying, okay, I really understand why it's important, because if the president of the company feels it's important enough, then I know it's important enough for me to follow it. So we want to make sure we set examples. So let's talk about basic GMPs, and these relate back to what we saw specifically in CF 21 CFR 117. Practice such as coming to work clean with clean clothes, and we want people to come to work physically clean. You know, we want them clean. We want their clothes to be clean with no stains, rips, or tears. And you know, we know, depending upon where we are, where we live, and where our facilities are, we may have people that live, you know, outside the city. They live in the country. They may have a little farm. They may have a little ranch where they have animals, and we know that they, you know, you have to get up early in the morning and feed the animals. But whatever we wear out there, we want something different coming into work, because we don't want them out with the animals and then coming in with something that may be, you know, bringing contamination to the plant. No signs of infectious disease, and of course we're looking here for fevers, chills, cough, nausea, diarrhea, things like that. Any indications of infections. And again, we go back to what we talked about before, which is we may want to make sure, when I do education with the personnel in the facility, I like to have the HR personnel involved in these, because if there's anything we touch on that may be questionable or a little bit sensitive, I want to make sure that the HR person is there to help address it. Now, in most of our facilities, we use hair nets or beard covers, at least I hope we do. And we want to make sure that they are allowing for complete enclosure. And the thing with hair is, you know, when we talk about these being food safety types of GMPs and practices, to some extent, hair in the product really becomes a quality defect more than a food safety issue. Nobody wants to find hair in their food. We want clean smocks, changed as needed if they become soiled. We want to make sure we emphasize hand washing. And I've got a slide in here, a couple slides in here specifically about hand washing. And I think I said before, hands cleaned as often as necessary during operation, because what we found is that hand washing is one of the most effective means of preventing transfer of either harmful bacteria or allergen ingredients. Gloves and aprons and sleeves, if used, are maintained in clean condition. And personal items are stored away from food processing areas. We don't want people, you know, storing their personal items in the processing area any more than we absolutely have to. And I realize some of our facilities that we're in are not brand new facilities. We don't have adequate space or adequate areas, but we really need to make sure as much as possible personnel items are stored away from food processing areas. Food and beverage consumption and tobacco use are for designated areas for storage, consumption of food, or for use of tobacco or tobacco products. And obviously, we shouldn't be allowing tobacco products in the facility. And of course, you know, we have to look at our GMPs over the course of time and say, gee, you know, we may need to update these, because, you know, when I started in the industry, the biggest challenge we had, especially, I started in the poultry side of the industry, The biggest challenge we had was people putting chew tobacco or skull or something like that, and using that and spitting in the plant. Now we have to consider, okay, what do we talk about with regards to vaping? Obviously, we don't want vaping in the facility, but do we have a designated area for smokers and for people that vape? So we've got to keep up with things like that. Jewelry was the same thing. And when I first started, we didn't have to, when I first started in the industry, we didn't talk about, body piercings and nose piercings and tongue and lip. And now we have to consider that. But unsecured jewelry has to be removed. And we have to make sure we have measures to prevent allergen cross contact. And certainly that means we would have an allergen program, a supplement to the GMPs, a specific allergen program to make sure we prevent cross contact. Now, as far as posting materials, I like the use of this type of posting. I like to have signage where people can see. And one of the things that we need to consider is whether or not we need to have our GMPs or the signage in multiple languages, because we have multiple languages spoken in our facilities. It may be as simple as we have English, Spanish. We may have English, Spanish, Chinese. In one of the Ajinomoto facilities, I spent 27 years with what started out as specialty brands, then became Windsor Foods, then became Ajinomoto. And the Ajinomoto facility in Portland, Oregon, I think they said they have people that speak 9 different languages. So you've got Vietnamese, you've got Chinese, you've got Tagalog, you've got English, you've got Spanish, you've got Ukrainian, you've got Russian. So they have to have, now, a lot of the speakers are fluent in their native language as well as English, but they still have to have a lot of these documents in multiple languages. So I do like to have these types of things posted. I like to have them someplace where people can be reminded before they access the production floor. Maybe this is in the locker room. Maybe this is in the vestibule before they go into the facility, where they get their hairnets, earplugs, things like that. But I want to make sure that I give them an example of what is right and what we don't want to have in the facility. So I like postings, but again, they've got to be strategically located so that they're most effective. Otherwise, why post it and make sure that whether or not you need to have it in multiple languages. Now, infectious disease.
Hey, Mike. Can I
Yes.
stop you here for a second? Yeah,
Yes,
we just had a question come in, and I want to catch it before you go too far.
Sure.
It relates to the item storage. So the question being, for personal item storage, does this also include shipping areas? So they recently had a finding around this being not a processing area.
I've had that question come up, and it's a really good question. I've had that question come up before with regards to warehouse and shipping areas, and even in facility office areas, where sometimes within the facility you have an office that looks out onto the production floor, has access out on the production floor. Can they keep their lunches in there? Can they keep snacks in there? I've tried to be fairly reasonable with regards to things like that, as far as, could they have a coffee maker in the shipping office, the warehouse office, do they have a little area for the truck drivers? And I think the answer is, yeah, I think that's probably okay. I don't think from a regulatory standpoint that you could say no, because we're talking about designated areas identified for storage and consumption of food. So if you say, look, I'm going to allow people to consume food in the warehouse office, that's something that you can build into the GMPs. Here are the designated areas for storage and consumption. What I would want to also make sure is that there's an understanding that these need to be maintained in a clean and sanitary condition, because a concern that I would have, particularly with storage and consumption of food is that we're not creating a situation where we're going to be attracting pests. And so that's what I would advise, is that you really want to take a look at what facility do I have to store the food or beverage items, and how effective are, is the cleanup for that. In one of the Ajinomoto facilities, they created a little break area, a little lunch area right in the middle of the maintenance shop. And I walked in there, I looked at it, and I was with the QA manager. I said, well, how are they maintaining it? And he said, they really do a pretty good job. I said, okay, let's keep an eye on it. Do we have any pest issues in this area? No. So I want to make sure I have at least documentation, and if I don't have any pest issues, how well are they following whatever instruction we give them? I think that's the answer that I would give. It is, how well can you maintain it?
Very good. Yeah. So I've got a follow-up question. It seems like now that we've broken the seal on questions, looks like we might get a couple coming in here. But so we'll take a minute here and answer a couple if you're right with it.
Sure.
So a similar question actually starts with, similarly, in the case of a warehouse, is it appropriate to have a hydration station inside the warehouse itself? And are there any recommendations regarding the distance between this area and the storage space for the items?
That's a great question. And I've encountered this as well. One of our facilities, out in the pack-off floor, where, now this was after product was all primary packaging, or if it's bulk, everything was in the bulk cases, and then in the, the palletizing area, they had a hydration station. And, we talked about that, and, they had it set up in an area that was away from, there was no exposed food in that area. It was water. It was specifically water. So it wasn't Gatorade or anything that, could be a little bit of a sugary attractant. And water is, it does attract, I mean, a lot of the pests we deal with are attracted to water. But they had the paper cups. They had a container right by the station so that they could throw the cups away, the paper cups away. And this was in an area of San Diego. And, while the weather in Southern California is beautiful, this was, Southern California. You could literally look out the window from one of the upstairs offices, and you could look across into Tijuana. It is warm there at times. And so you talk about an area where now you're talking about an ambient area. You're outside the refrigerated area, you're in the ambient area, and it can get a little bit warm. I would say this, again, I would want to make sure that I'm very clear on how we handle it, where we have the water, how we clean up spills, it's a dry area, how we make sure that there's no trash on the floor, that there are trash containers. But I would also look at it from the standpoint of, if it's a welfare area for employee safety, if that's necessary, I would say it's I don't want people getting overheated and passing out. So I would want to make sure that I'm clear on how I'm going to handle that.
All right. While you have this slide up too, I think this is an appropriate time for this one. How to handle usage or restrictions on phones, smartwatches, earbuds, safety point of view in GMP areas.
I think I do cover that, in a later slide, because again, as we talked about with, with vaping and things like that, these technologies continue to change. So I think I do touch on a slide coming up, but I would say a couple of things, especially with usage of phones or earbuds or things like that. They can become a distraction. They can become a distraction for personnel if I'm listening to music or if I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, and I'm not focused on my work. I would really try to avoid that. Now, from a food safety standpoint, anything that goes in the ears, Okay, so I use these when I go to the gym. You know, they fit up over around my ears, and so they're not gonna come off. But you know, if you talk about the typical iPods and things like that, they can come out. They can become a safety hazard. I would not allow them for that reason. Number one. Number two, you're listening to something that is not allowing you to focus on your work. Therefore, you could be making mistakes on quality, you could be making mistakes on food safety, or you could be creating a distraction where you're going to end up with an injury. So I would avoid the use of any type of electronics within the facility, except where designated for things like communication. If, you know, if you're a supervisor in one area, you need a you need a walkie-talkie, or the ones that have the, you know, the in-earbud to allow you to communicate. Then, you know, and again, I would want to make sure I have very strict control over things like that.
All right. I'll do one more here for you now.
Sure.
Along the same lines of you know, some of these basics, I have a forklift drivers that drive in and out of the warehouse. They have requested to use caps to help them provide shade when outside. Could you advise on that?
Yeah, if we're talking about bump caps, for example, bump caps, again, they are not a require. And let's talk about two different things. Let's talk about bump caps versus like baseball caps and things like that. When we talk about bump caps, that's not necessarily a requirement for GMPs, but we do know in a lot of the industries, particularly in the meat and poultry industry, you will see bump caps used because you got things moving, you got equipment, and sometimes they're just the scalp cap that, you know, if you bump into something, you're not going to get a laceration. They may be a little bit more heavy duty. I've seen some that, you know, because people have got the, you know, the muffs, the hearing protection, and I'll talk a little bit about things like hearing protection here. But you do want to make sure that those are kept clean and that they are stored in a proper location, and that you're inspecting them periodically to see if there's any cracks or chips or anything that become for a material hazard. Now, if we're talking about you know, baseball caps or sunshade type caps, you know, that's, I've had questions like that come up for the drivers, especially the drivers that are going in and out of freezers and things like that. Now, obviously, we let them wear the you know, the insulated type of hats and things like that, especially if they're going into freezers and then loading on freezer trucks. Okay, we want to keep people comfortable. If we're talking about they're going outside for loading and unloading purposes, you know, again, I think we need to be aware of the fact that protecting people and protecting their health is important. We should look at it, you know, like anything else, we should look at it from a risk assessment standpoint. Is there is there a risk? What type of a risk? You know, you look at, maybe I should go this way. You're looking at it from a risk assessment standpoint. What is the potential, and how severe is the potential? And so we want to take a look at that. And if you say, look, these drivers don't go anywhere else in the facility, okay, you know, I think you want to look at it from that standpoint.
Very good. Thanks, Mike. I'll let you get back to it.
Oh, sure. There is one other thing that I have in my notes here because I've had this question come up before. What about shorts? What about dresses? There are some groups that, you know, the women have to wear dresses. And again, I would say shorts. You know, if it's a warm environment, ambient environment, I'd still challenge that from the standpoint of, you know, it's typically we're looking at hazards at a product level and above, but I'd also want to make sure I'm consistent. And if I tell you you can't wear shorts, I shouldn't wear shorts either. From dresses, as a, you know, from a religious requirement in certain areas of the country, I think you need to do an assessment of that and say, you know, what is my risk? And then, you know, can I accommodate personnel for their specific needs? I would take a look at that. These are great questions. Appreciate it, and you know, certainly keep them coming in. I may not have experienced all of these, but I'll certainly try to make sure that, you know, I look at you know, what your questions are. From an infectious disease standpoint, this is something that we do want to make sure that we're addressing somewhere within our GMPs, or if anything within our HR policies or human resource policies. You know, we have some very common communicable diseases, cold and flu, and we go through different seasons where colds and flu are a little bit more prevalent. And because these are typically viral, typically airborne, and their, you know, exposure is from a cough or a sneeze, droplets when we cough and when we sneeze. Heck, some of us when we speak, especially pop our Ps, where you can see that sometimes spraying. We do want to make sure we recognize that there are different times of the year. If you go outside with your hair wet, you're not going to get sick. If it's February and it's 20 degrees outside, you're not going to get sick. You're exposed to a virus. The reason why we tend to get more sick during those periods of time is because we're inside more often with people more often, and there's, you know, it's a little bit more congestion, no pun intended. So we want to be able to address colds and flu. What do we do if people are showing symptoms? Staph infections, we really have to be careful of, because again, staph infections are a sign that there is bacteria present, staph bacteria present. And so if there are cuts, open sores, boils, things like that, we really want to avoid having people handling food. Can we give them gloves? I tell you what, if I got an open sore or a boil on my hand, I don't know if I want to put a glove on there, but we want to make sure we're addressing that. There are some more that are higher concern, hepatitis, for example. And there's hepatitis A, B, C. They're caused by different type of exposures to different things. You know, A is typically shellfish, or could be infected food handlers. We've had restaurants in the you know, in the recent past where they've had to shut down because there's been an outbreak of hepatitis A. I didn't include norovirus in here because that's really that's something that's more in concentrated areas like cruise ships and things like that, where you've got thousands of people on board and there's a lot of touching of surfaces. But we would be concerned with hepatitis. We'd want to make sure we understand, you know, what the visible symptoms are, and if we do have concerns about it, again, we've got to be very careful. We've got to be very aware of maintaining employee privacy. Tuberculosis, for the most part in the United States, we've taken care of that. We eradicated it many years ago, but we do have people that come in from other countries, and you know, we do have to be aware of the fact that it is still prevalent in other countries. We had an employee at a facility up in the Northeast one time. This was a pasta facility, and you know, a couple of people had come over from Italy, and one of them started to show the symptoms, sent them out for testing, and turns out they were positive for tuberculosis. So we do have to be aware of that. We want to make sure we develop plans to address communicable disease prevention, and that may include specific measurements that we want to take to prevent transmission from one person to another, from a person to a surface to a person, from a person to product. Now, we talked about person to product when, you know, during COVID, and most of these, you just don't transmit, you know, like tuberculosis and COVID from person to product. But you can transmit staph, you can transmit hepatitis from person to product. So we do want to make sure we recognize how we're going to handle this, such as exclusion from work, temperature monitoring, or use of specific PPE for the job that they're doing, but really exclusion if they're showing symptoms, or if we know that they are affected by a staph infection, for example. We just want to keep them away from handling ingredients or product. I do, again, want to involve HR because I want to make sure that they have input on how we present this, how we discuss it. We have to maintain employee privacy. You know, we can't just say, hey, I think so-and-so has got, and so I'm going to exclude them. I think we need to involve HR to make sure that we're not trampling on any of their rights. We still got to protect food, but we also have to protect people.
Hey, Mike.
We also want to prevent the spread and reduce exposure to product. And so for that reason, we want to make sure we have some type of a protocol for how do we handle injuries and possible blood exposure. No matter how we take precautions, we put signage on equipment saying, don't open this door. Hopefully if you open that door, it stops the equipment. But unfortunately, I've been around situations where people found a way around those things and, you know, they get injured. We have a lot of moving equipment in a lot of our facilities. We want to make sure, first of all, that workers are confident they can report injuries, okay? The first thing we should do when a person gets injured is not start with the inquisition, okay? First thing we want to do is take care of the individual. Then we can go back and we can do a download and say, okay, what happened? How did this happen? We want to have a stocked first aid kit and personnel who are trained in first aid, okay? And I would have some type of an inspection process for first aid kits to make sure that, you know, if I open that up and I need something to flush out somebody's eyes, the container is missing or empty, okay? So I want to make sure those kits are effective. I want to clean and bandage minor wounds, or if it's worse than that, obviously I want to make arrangements to get them the proper treatment, get them to a clinic or, you know, wherever they need to go to get treatment. If it's a more serious wound, you know, severe laceration, you know, unfortunately in parts of our industry, amputation sometimes occurs. So we want to make sure we can handle it. And then if there is some type of bodily fluid exposure, now this may be blood, this may be somebody just gets sick out on the line and throws up. I mean, there could be a lot of different things that we have some means of controlling the line and the product. If we can identify when it happened, we know our lines move at fairly high speed. Okay, how far do I have to control product? I want to make sure I clean and sanitize the areas that may have come in contact with bodily fluid. And then I discard any product suspected of being contaminated. And I always go on the basis of go large, go big. You know, if I think this much product was impacted, I'm going to take this much product and dispose of it. I know we don't like waste, but I don't want to take any chances. I also want to make sure that whoever is involved in handling the individual, helping the individual, treating the individual, and sanitors who are cleaning the area are receiving some type of decontamination. Their equipment is being decontaminated or disposed of. And, you know, if there is PPE, you know, either we discard, you know, if it's damaged, we discard the PPE. We want to make sure that we control as much as possible so we don't have any further contamination.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Catch you really quick there on this slide. Had another question come in kind of along these lines. In this case here, it's a use case of sores. We have a kitchen staff member who repeatedly has an open sore on the inside edge of the nose. The moisture in the kitchen appears to exacerbate it. The question is, how can this be covered so she could continue to work, or should they consider not being allowed to let this person work in the kitchen entirely?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, particularly the nose, because that's a moist area anyway, or naturally a moist area. If it's a sore on the inside of the nose, I guess, you know, one of the first questions that I would have is, you know, are you getting any, and again, we have to be very careful how we approach this. I'd want to know if there's any treatment, you know, for that, going for that. As far as can it be covered, you know, the typical beard covering is not going to be sufficient because they're typically a mesh that's kind of open, you know, allows for transmission, air transmission, things like that. I do have an image of, Ninja mask. A Ninja mask pretty much, if you haven't seen them, it's a hood, and it pretty much, this is all you see on the person. I like them because it completely covers the hair. If they have beards, completely covers that. The problem with the nose is getting the nose covered. And again, you can say, okay, well, look, I need you to wear like a KN95 mask. I don't necessarily like them, but at least with a KN95, you know that it does protect against some viral transmission. So, that's one possibility. But again, again, working with HR, I think I'd want to find out if there's, some type of a treatment. If this is a chronic condition, then, that may be something that needs to be addressed. And, if it's something that can't be controlled, I hate to say it, but maybe working in the kitchen is not the place to be. I think you have a couple of options you have to look at.
Perfect. No more questions for now, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, so we do get into hair covering, and again, if you look at the typical type of the hairnet and beard guard, they aren't always completely sealed, but we do want people wearing clean hairnets, clean beard coverings at the start of the day, and we want to make sure that they're worn in a manner that contains all of their hair. We want to make sure everything is contained within that. For beard, then we have, we have the interesting thing of, okay, what constitutes a beard? If I just didn't shave for a couple of days and I've got a little stubble, is that a beard? If I've got a mustache, am I going to go with the lip rule? You have to determine, I think part of what you have to determine there is, what is, this is one of those things that's not really well defined in regulation. So what are your complaints that you've gotten on hair? Have you gotten any complaints on hair? Now, if I get no complaints on hair, does that mean I just don't wear hairnets? No. Wearing hairnets is a preventive measure to prevent hair from getting into product. But I want to make sure that the hairnets are kept in good condition. They're replaced as necessary. So if they get holes in them, then they need to be replaced. And at the end of the day, they're discarded. I had a plant manager one time say, well, we spend a lot of money on these hairnets. How about if I, at the end of the day, if I have them keep them and they just turn them out inside out and wear them the next day? No, because what's ever on the inside now is on the outside. They're not that expensive. Best practice, have a good supply of medium and large, because we do have people that have longer hair. We have hairstyles now that, the typical hairnet may not, completely enclose. So we want to make sure we have different sizes. They should be disposed if they get torn. And there may be options for the Ninja hoods. Now, this is an example of one that I found. There are different styles, but this is what I'm talking about. And for an individual that maybe there's a problem with the nose, this might be something that could be used effectively. What I like about it is, and again, they're different styles, different sizes. They completely enclose the hair, and that includes facial hair, and they can cover the mouth and the nose as well. Dispensers, I'm not selling anything, but I like the ideas of dispensers. For example, in this, here, if you've got different colors that you use to signify different jobs, or if you have different colors to signify different, areas of the facility, we used colors to signify, if they were white, it's the person that had been on the job more than 90 days, and so they've got some experience. If they're green, less than 90 days, and they're less experienced. So if the person has green hairnet and they're not really sure about something, they can go to a person with a white hairnet and say, hey, what about this? Conversely, if the person with the white hairnet sees somebody with a green hairnet and they're doing something they shouldn't, they can go to them and advise them, counsel them, things like that. There's a lot of different reasons why you might want different colors, but I like these dispensers. Makes it easy for people to get to. You can keep a variety of colors, different sizes, different types that you need. Just makes it convenient. As far as smocks are concerned, again, start clean at the start of the operation and replaced as they become soiled or torn, as they get worn out. Eventually, with rips and tears, we want to replace them. We don't want to have threads. Again, threads are not necessarily a food safety hazard, but we don't want threads in our product. We don't want cloth in our product. And we want to make sure that if there are rips and tears, they aren't possibly going to get caught on equipment. We don't want them worn in the restrooms, the break rooms, or outside the plant. If we're saying to people, we want you to wear these covers so that you are protected, we're protecting the product from your clothing, I don't want to wear those in an area where it's going to possibly contaminate the smock that I'm going to wear into the food area. And for best practices, no upper pockets. They can't store anything in the upper pockets. No buttons, snaps only. We don't want buttons popping off. And maybe color coding to designate job areas or departments. A lot of times what we see is, especially maintenance has a different color. Operational sanitation people may have a unique color. And operations, if we're talking about raw and ready to eat areas, if I'm in a ready to eat meat plant, hot dog plant or something like that, I may want white in the ready to eat area and maybe a different color in the raw area, so that I can say, I know when people are not in the areas that they're supposed to be. So I like color coding as long as it doesn't get out of control and make it difficult for people to follow, because I'm not sure what color I should be wearing. Hand washing. I mentioned this, and I'm going to really, really hammer on hand washing, because hand washing has been identified as one of the most effective means of microbiological control within a facility. And if you think about your normal day, think about the things that you touch, and understand that some of the things you're touching may not be sanitary. So if I'm going out and I'm going to touch food product, ingredients, or finished product, my hands may not be as clean as they need to be. So I want to make sure that I have good hand washing expectations for personnel. And that starts with, there has to be an adequate number of hand washing stations and in locations that are convenient. So depending on your number of hand washing stations may be based on the number of employees you have. How you have them situated may be so that they're in close proximity to areas where people need to wash their hands frequently, or may want to wash their hands frequently. And we want to make sure that they are supplied with adequate quantities of soap, paper towels, and trash cans for disposal of the paper towels. One of the worst things that we can do for people is say, you need to wash your hands with soap, and then you need to dry them with a paper towel, and then we don't have soap and paper towels. So we make sure we have have those addressed. And then finally, we need to address, we need to determine if we need to identify sinks as hand wash only. We see this a lot in meat and poultry plants, where we may have to have a sink where we have to rinse off a piece of meat. That's a wash station only. That's not hand wash. We may need to identify stations as hand wash only. And we want to make sure that our personnel understand the proper way to wash their hands. And the way I describe it is just like we would do if we're cleaning the food facility. When I talk about cleaning the food facility, I use it as an example of how we clean our hands. We wet the hands thoroughly. The water helps to start the breakdown of soils. We rub our hands, we add soap and rub our hands together briskly to form a lather. We want to make a good lather. We want to scrub the backs of the hands, in between the fingers, around the cuticles. That's the way we want to wash. We say scrub for about 20 seconds, and I know people have used the old, I've gone through plants where they're singing happy birthday 2 times. That's fine. The idea is the more I scrub, the more I'm removing the soils of concern. Then once rinse my hands, I may repeat if it's needed. If I look and I still see I've got some soils. And then I'm going to dry my hands with a paper towel. The next slide, I'm going to tell you why. And then sanitize the hands. Now, since we've got a number of people on here, I'm not going to use this as a discussion point, but, you know, if we talk about temperature requirements, and I'm going to use that word requirement for hand washing, and I've asked this question in classes that I've taught, you know, what is the temperature required for washing your hands? And again, you know, 100 degrees, 105 degrees, 110 degrees. The reality is there is no regulatory requirement for water temperature for washing your hands. There just is not. There isn't one. What you will see in verbiage related to hand washing is adequate. It's got to be potable, and it's got to be of an adequate temperature to be comfortable. Okay, we want to encourage people to wash their hands, so we want that water temperature to be comfortable. Now, you know, 120 degrees is going to be awfully hot. 90 degrees may be comfortable, but we want to make sure that we can encourage people. We want them to, hey, I don't have a problem washing my hands. Now, when we talk about air hand dryers and you know, versus paper towels versus cloth, some of the numbers are coming in, and it looks like we've got a good high percentage of people that are saying, no, we don't use air hand dryers. And that's great to see. We've got some that do. Obviously in the slide here on the left, these cloth incubators, you know, this goes way back. Hopefully nobody's got any of these in their facility, but these are just, these are germs, you know, waiting to happen. So we don't want those. I'll tell you the reason why I don't like the air hand dryers, and that is, you know, airports especially, you're going to see these air hand dryers. So we're looking at like 75 to 80% of you saying, no, we don't use these. And that's great to see. And I know there was a push a few years ago to use the air hand dryers because, you know, we got to save the trees, man. You know, we got to stop using paper. But the thing with the air hand dryers, and you've probably experienced this too, it just blows stuff all over the place. And if somebody hasn't washed their hands properly, I don't want them going in and getting all that on the wall. You can see on the wall in this middle picture where there's a little bit of soil there because of, you know, apparently people aren't totally washing their hands. The gym that I go to, they've got these, and every time I've gotten to the point where I just shake my hands off and walk out, and, you know, after I wash my hands, I shake them off and then I go out and use a little alcohol sanitizer because I don't like the blowing back at me. And there's some of them, I'm not going to mention the names, but there's some of them that have a little pool at the bottom and all they do is blow that stuff. So I don't like them. I definitely like paper. Paper is a renewable resource. Every paper company plants a lot of their own trees, so it's a renewable resource. So I like the paper hand towels.
Mike,
there are a lot of different types of,
Mike, before we go
yes.
on, there's a lot of questions coming in on hand washing and some practices there. Maybe a good time to stop and answer some of those.
Sure.
So starting there, what if we use air hand dryers, but we do air plating for the air?
I mean, you can do that, and you may have data that supplements that, you know, you don't have a quality problem. This is more of a personal, you know, I just don't like the idea, and especially, hopefully we don't have another situation like COVID, but when we talk about things being airborne, contaminants being airborne, if you've got air hand dryers, all you're doing is circulating things in the air. And again, you know, I think anytime you can support something with microbiological data, it's good. I mean, if you can support it, then again, just personal preference, I would not want to see them. But if you do have the data, sure.
Very good. This question is around employees washing their hands. So how to confirm the employees wash their hands or not? And then kind of a side question, what is the frequency to wash hands in food manufacturing industry? This person specifically calling out the pea protein isolate production.
You know, the standard expectation is I'm going to wash my hands prior to accessing my workplace. So whatever I'm doing, I'm going to wash my hand, then I'm going to go to my workplace. If my hands get soiled during operation, now, you know, if I'm handling raw meat, for example, or if I'm handling dough, you know, flour dough, if I'm handling those types of things, I don't expect to wash my hands in between every piece of meat, every, you know, batch of dough in between. What we usually say is initially upon entering the plant and as often as needed, depending upon how soiled your hands become. But there are certain things that I would expect. If I drop something on the floor and pick it up, I'm going to wash my hands. If I touch a pallet, if I move a pallet, and if my job shouldn't require me touch a pallet and then go touch food, it shouldn't do that. But if for whatever reason, my job says I got to touch this pallet and I got to go touch food, I'm going to wash my hands. I think the expectation is if there's something that could possibly make the hands become insanitary, I'm going to wash them before I touch an ingredient or food product. As far as monitoring for compliance, obviously, you know, especially the QA departments, we're not staffed to be able to watch everybody wash their hands all the time. You can't have somebody standing there. But you know, there are a couple of things that we've done, you know, within industry, and that's periodically we'll take hand swabs, and then you know we'll do hand swabs to verify that you know that people have their hands are relatively clean, and if they're not, if they come back with high counts, then we're going to look at, you know, okay, what might have been the cause of that? Is it possibly something you're touching? Is it possibly you're not washing your hands or not washing your hands properly? You know, what are the reasons for that? There are hand wash systems where, you know, if employee, and a lot more and more, we have people that have badges to access, you know, the work area that they have. And some of these hand wash systems are automatic readers. So for example, if I work in the facility and, you know, I go in there in the morning, I go in there after break, after lunch, after the second break, I should have at least 4 or 5 different times that reader says I wash my hands, because I'm at the sink and there's a I don't know if it's magnetic, but it's reading that. That's neat technology. I'm not really familiar with it. We didn't have it, but that's a possibility. But if I'm going into the plant and working and it says, you know, you didn't record this at all, you know, is it because I didn't wash my hands? So yes, periodically, I think we need to do some monitoring, maybe at the startup of the day, or, you know, whatever we have as far as periods where we could assign a person to monitor that. But again, a lot of us don't have the luxury of a lot of people to be able to watch hand washing. So I'd use things like swabs or, you know, contact plates. I don't like contact plates necessarily, but hand swabs certainly could be done.
Very good. A few more questions here. Is hand washing preferred over wearing gloves?
That's a great question. Let's finish this slide and we'll go to gloves. For hand washing, there are a couple of different things that I want to point out. There are these units here on the left. where we had them in one of our facilities here in Texas, and you put your hands in, and we did a lot of swabs on people's hands, and these things are very effective. Not trying to sell them, that's not my job, but they are very effective. When I first started in the industry many years ago, this one in the middle, that was one that was very common in food facilities, kind of the communal hand wash station. It does have the soap dispenser on it. It's kind of have the shower water coming out of it. You have to step on the little thing at the bottom. You also have to make sure that people do understand this is for hand washing, not for anything else. And then of course, alcohol dispensers, the dispensers for hand sanitizer, they come in different forms, mount them to the wall, put them on floor stands, things like that. I'd make them as available as possible. Now, when we talk about gloves, this is a great question, because why do we wear gloves? Well, we wear gloves, and the reason why, and we explain this to people, we wear gloves in a lot of our industry, a lot of our processes, we wear gloves to protect the food from our hands, not to protect our hands from the food. So when we talk about washing our hands versus wearing gloves, if I'm going to have people wear gloves, if I'm requiring that they wear gloves, you're still going to wash your hands before you put the gloves on. And the reason for that is, if you look at the picture, you see that there's a hole in this glove. So if I don't wash my hands and I wear a glove and it's got a hole in it, I've really kind of defeated the purpose of the gloves. The gloves are simply something that we do because it's an extra layer of protection between our hands. Because again, we talk about cleaning under, around our nails and our cuticles and things like that. And, sometimes it's difficult to get, absolutely clean. So, if we do require gloves, they will be clean and free from tears and missing pieces. Do we wash the gloves? Okay. A couple of years ago, there was a problem with gloves that were coming into the country. And I can't remember if this was during COVID or if it was just after that, but we were going everywhere around the world to get gloves because they were in short supply because of the pandemic. And there was a problem with gloves. And again, my memory is a little sketchy on this, but there was a problem with some of the gloves. So my recommendation is, if we're requiring people to wear gloves, if they touch food product, that's a contact surface. I would periodically, maybe an incoming supply part of your process is take some of the gloves and, either swab them or maybe do them in a dip and, in a bag and then, plate out what you can get out of the liquid in the bag. Because there was a problem, and I think it was either Listeria or Salmonella with the gloves coming in. I think it might have been Salmonella because it was related back to how they were stored and, pests and things like that. But if you're a USDA facility and you're a USDA meat and poultry, ready to eat meat and poultry facility, so if you're making hot dogs, if you're making sausages, if you're making smoked deli meats and cooked deli meats and things like that, swabbing the gloves should be part of your environmental listeria program. That's something that you should be doing. And we'll be doing a class on listeria in the next couple of months. But I want to make sure that it's understood that gloves are not a replacement for washing your hands. You wash your hands. Now, if your job requires that you wear gloves, I'd say have sanitizer so you can sanitize the gloves before you handle food. And if you're working, depending upon your operation, if I'm working in a ready-to-eat meat and poultry, like I said, hot dogs, deli meat, I'm going to have people wearing gloves. I just don't want to take chances with their hands. They will be changed as often as needed. Now, let me go back and hopefully that answered the questions about gloves preferred over washing hands or washing hands preferred over gloves. I want to wash my hands, put on the glove, sanitize the glove. They're going to be changed as often as needed. So in this particular picture example, you can see that there's a hole in that. That's where I'm going to, now he's got a little bit of soil on the gloves. That may be part of, the work routine. Once you get that hole in there, it needs to be replaced. And they'll be discarded at the end of the day. We're not going to carry gloves over and wear them again a second day. These disposable type gloves are disposable. Now, best practices: blue metal detectable gloves and sleeves. Especially, like I said, ready to eat operation, we wear sleeves that help protect from contamination by smocks and arms and things like that. Swabs as part of a micro verification program. And if the sleeves are used, I would look for the microporous type. They provide a little bit more comfort because there is some air circulation that can go on in there. They're microporous, so air can get in, keeps them cool, but nothing gets out. The liquid doesn't get out. We talked a lot about food and beverage, tobacco and things like that, stored away from food production process. And again, I don't want to beat it up too much. We prefer that they're not stored in lockers, but if they do have to be stored in lockers, if that's where you designate the location, I would want to make sure that we're maintaining the lockers in a clean condition. Therefore, I want to have some type of a locker inspection periodically to assure that they're clean and they're not posing a source of attraction or harborage of pests of concern. And best practices for lockers: I want to have slope tops. I don't want flat tops. I know that gets into sanitary design, and we'll do a sanitary design class, but the slope top prevents dust accumulation. For food and beverage and tobacco, again, specific areas where people can consume, store food and tobacco. We talked about, areas in the plant where maybe we do allow, such as in internal offices or warehouse or maintenance areas. I think again, you have to assess whether or not we can effectively store them, whether they're being kept clean, whether there's any possibility of attraction that we have to be concerned with, or whether they're creating an insanitary condition. As far as tobacco, obviously chewing tobacco just absolutely prohibited because of the need to spit periodically. If you've got an external smoking area, I know some facilities have an external smoking area. I still think that I would say, hey, look, no chewing tobacco during the facility, because it can get all over. That would be my recommendation, unless it's physically outdoors, but even there. Jewelry. So my wife worked. I finally got her to stop working so we could spend more time together. But she loves her jewelry. But she worked in the food industry too. She worked in quality in the food industry, so she understands all of these things that she's wearing, she cannot wear during operations. We have to be concerned with unsecured jewelry, things that are exposed, piercings, clip-on earrings, rings with stones, and that's a debate that we have from time to time. Can I wear my wedding band? It doesn't have any stones in it. Can I wear that? That's one of those, again, I think it goes back to, I would look at data. A lot of the things that we do within quality assurance, within food safety, is data driven. I go back and say, have I swabbed any of these rings without stones, plain bands and things like that? Do I have any safety issues? Do I have any microbiological concerns? Do I have any losses of rings and things like that? I would look at the data. Personally, I would say, I'd really rather not have jewelry in the facility, but certainly things like hair clips, bracelets, fake fingernails and eyelashes, things like that, anything that could get into the product, I don't want to get in there. Fake fingernails, they're going to be maybe a little crunchy, maybe not create a dental hazard. Eyelashes, I don't want people to think there's bugs in our product. But jewelry, you have to also look at the the type of jewelry. Is it going to create a microbiological hazard? Is it difficult to clean? My ring, my wedding band is actually made up of 3 different rings. My mom gave me my dad's wedding band when he passed away, and so I had mine made up with his in the middle and 2 on the outside. So that was my, but they're not perfectly sealed. They're just kind of tacked, on the inside. So that's going to be difficult to clean. So you have to really consider, how easy will it be to clean these? Could they become microbiological harbors? But certainly foreign material. If you've got earrings with, earrings with stones, dangly earrings, things like that can get into the product, that becomes a foreign material hazard. And that could, this jewelry could create a dental injury, could create a, irritation to the mouth, the tongue, the throat, things like that. So I really want to encourage having a very robust GMP procedure as far as jewelry is concerned. And certainly, and again, I haven't heard of it happening too often, but it's brought up enough in different meetings and webinars I've been to, where it could potentially create a personnel hazard if it was to catch on moving equipment, pull somebody into it. Again, I've not heard of it. Maybe you have, and you can use that as an example, but I've not experienced, I should say. I've heard of it, but I've not experienced it. So, I just wouldn't want to take the chance. I want to make sure our people come to work, they got 10 fingers, 10 toes, they go home, they got 10 fingers, 10 toes, and they don't have cuts and scratches or anything like that. I want to make sure that they're well protected, because we got a lot of moving equipment, and I can tell you from experience, moving equipment has no soul. It has no, it's either moving or it's not moving, and it doesn't look at it and say, well, maybe I need to slow down because you got a bracelet on. It'll just pull things in there. Now, FSMA is the first time from a regulatory standpoint that we actually see allergens being addressed. FSMA requires an allergen preventive control. So we want to make sure that we build into our GMPs education in the prevention of allergen cross-contact. And if I'm a USDA facility and I've got allergens, I want to do the same thing too. I'm going to do, if what's written in 21 CFR 117 is pretty good for FDA facilities, I'm going to use that for USDA facility, because there's a good basis for these from a food safety standpoint. Also, you'll see I use the word education. We use the word training. Training's fine. I like to educate people. Part of what I like to be able to do is not tell them this is what you're going to do. This is why. I want to make sure they understand why they're going to do it, because I want to draw an emotional connection and say, I want you to understand how important this is and why you need to follow it. Now, prevention of allergen cross-contact may include specifically trained personnel to handle allergen ingredients. If I'm going to have somebody handle eggs or soy or wheat flour or whatever, nuts, whatever it happens to be, I want to make sure that they are receiving specific education and training. I'm probably going to have this as part of my GMPs, but I'm also going to have an allergen management program to make sure I avoid cross-contact. I'm going to have specific tools for handling allergens, and that may be, color coding, or it may be specific cleaning procedures in between the use of allergens. And I probably am going to have separation of PPE, such as smocks, where they're stored to prevent allergen cross-contact. Now, how do I do that? There's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can separate people by time, or you can separate people physically. So if I've got 3 lines in a plant, we've had this happen in a couple of the Ajinomoto facilities, where you have, all 3 lines are running, breaded product with wheat. So they're all have wheat breading. But this one's got egg and this one's got soy. So line 1's got egg, line 2's got soy. Well, I can schedule their break. So line 1 goes first. They come out, they do their break. they come back, then line 2 goes. So that if I have a limited amount of space for storing smocks and things like that, they're not rubbing up against one another. I can separate them by space, and this is what we ended up doing in one of the facilities, is where we built the hangers for their smocks, the coat hangers right by where the hand wash station is. There's a physical space between line 1's smocks and line 2 smocks, between line 2 smocks and line 3 smocks. There's a physical space. So there's less opportunity for cross contact. So I may have to have some type of separation built in, but I also want to make sure that these are part of my GMPs. Now, there are supplements that I may include in my GMPs depending upon my operation, and they're going to be specific to operational and safety needs. So for hearing protection, there is no requirement for hearing protection from a FDA or USDA standpoint. Now there probably is for OSHA. Okay, so we may want to have some type of protection included in there so that we don't have people having hearing problems. Raw and ready to eat. Now, when we talk about, and we're getting some good feedback here on your products, we've got some raw, we've got some not ready to eat. Not ready to eat would be something where the consumer still has to cook it, like entrees. Okay, raw hamburger, I know I've got to cook it. Entrees, where you've got maybe a cooked piece of chicken, but then I've got vegetables that have only been blanched. Those are not ready to eat. And it's important that we understand what type of separation, if we also have a portion of the operation that is ready to eat. Ready to eat means I've prepared that product in a way the consumer does not have to provide any additional lethality. So we've got combination facilities here. It's really kind of interesting. We've got a good spread across raw, not ready to eat, and combination facilities. So you've got to look at your facility and say, do I need to have some type of physical separation between my raw and my ready to eat areas? If I am bringing in raw meat and I'm grinding it and I'm going to then cook it and produce some type of a ready to eat product, which we did in a number of the Ajinomoto facilities, then I am going to have a specific GMP that says, if you work in the raw area, you don't go into the ready to eat area. And if you work in the ready to eat area, you don't go in the raw area. Now, I may have to make some exceptions for maintenance. I may have to make some exceptions for QA personnel if they have to, be shared, which means I have to have a decontamination process, depending upon what way they're moving. But if I have raw and ready to eat, if I'm bringing in raw chicken, grinding it, cooking it up, and I'm making ready to eat burritos, I'm going to have physical separation. And not only am I going to have physical separation, okay, I'm going to make it difficult for people to get from one side to the other. But I may color code them so that I know. And so if you're working in the raw area, you may be wearing a red smock. And if you're working in ready to eat, you may be wearing a white smock. So I can see very clearly, this is going to be in your GMP for your facility. If you're not doing that, you may not have that concern about, crossover, depending upon what you're processing. If I'm bringing in spice, and I'm, if I'm drying or if I'm blending or if I'm doing something, combinations of spice, I may not have to be concerned with that. And that may not be in your GMPs, and that's perfectly fine. Footwear is going to be a concern, and it's going to be a concern from a couple of different standpoints, raw and ready to eat. But for footwear in general, I want closed shoes. I don't want open-toed shoes. Again, I want the body covered as much as possible. I don't want exposed skin or anything like that any more than I absolutely have to. But it'll be appropriate to the environment. And it may be footwear that either prevents slip and falls, depending upon what I'm doing. It may be footwear that has steel toes, depending upon what things are happening in the environment. I know in warehouses, a lot of times we expect people to employees to wear steel-toe shoes because we got pallets moving around. We got things, you know, that are set down, and we don't want people's feet getting hurt. In the ready-to-eat facilities that I'm used to, we have what we call captive footwear, because we know environmental contaminants can be brought from outside the facility inside the facility. So whatever you're wearing outside the facility, I want you to change those and wear something that I have here for you. And that way you're not transferring specifically Listeria monostogenes, maybe salmonella, maybe something else, but I don't want that coming from the outside into the facility. Now, we talked earlier about electronic devices and cell phones. I would restrict the uses, limit cell phone use, and identify who can use cell phones. The other thing we want to be aware of is the fact that not only from a GMP standpoint, because these things could get into product, can get into product streams like earbuds and Bluetooth devices. They can become a safety issue if people are using them and they're distracted, not focused on their jobs. But we also have to be aware of the fact that people are using their phones for taking pictures and videos that may end up on social media. And it's not that we're doing anything wrong within our facilities, but we do know a lot of the population has no idea what we do in our facilities. They don't understand the steps that we take to make sure that our product is safe. And it can easily be misinterpreted that something we're doing in the facility is not sanitary, or it can be manipulated so that it doesn't look like it's sanitary. So I would restrict the use. Now, when I would go into the facility, my role, I was Senior Director of Food Safety and Quality Assurance for Ajinomoto. So I had reason to go into the facility and take pictures if we were doing an inspection, if we were looking at sanitary design issues, sanitation practices, GMPs, things like that. I had the authorization to use my cell phone, but I would highly restrict use. If they want to use their cell phone in the break room, you know, when they're on break, okay, that's fine. But in the facility, I would restrict it. And certainly spitting anywhere in the facility would not be allowed, because again, we talked about different bacteria and viruses where it's related to saliva. I would make sure that I allow no spitting of any sort. That's the reason why I said too, we don't want to allow use of chewing tobacco and things like that, snuff and things like that. So here in the, in the middle is an example of captive footwear. I want to make sure that in my ready-to-eat facilities, I'm using that for a couple of reasons. Number one, they usually have good tread on the bottom. You want to make sure they have good tread. They provide good support, good arch support. People are on their feet for hours and hours and hours at a time. I want them to be comfortable. I want to keep their feet dry, especially if I'm in a wet environment. And I want to keep these in the facility. I probably will use some type of a boot scrubber that they go through when they come in and when they leave, so that these are clean. I also want to make sure that my PPE, for example, the earplugs, if I'm requiring people to wear them, they're connected so that if one pops out, it's still able to be connected by the other one, so that they don't get into product. I don't like the ones without the chain. I also want to make sure most of these can be found where they're metal detectable. They're blue. Blue is easier to spot in most of our products because very few of the blueberries and a few other things are blue. So they show up. And I want to make sure that if I use these blue metal detectable devices, that as part of my metal detector program, I am running these things through periodically with product samples so I can make sure that they actually are detected and are rejected depending upon the system that I've got. If I've got metal detectors, if I've got X-ray, I want to make sure they're dense enough to be picked up by X-ray. Once we have all of these GMPs in place, we've trained people and we've said, okay, go out there and make food. I want to make sure that I am monitoring. I want to make sure I have a documented monitoring process. I want to assure that they're following the GMP requirements that we've established. And then I want to make sure that the facility is clean and well stocked, so that, you know, when we talked about hand washing and making sure there is plenty of soap, making sure there are plenty of paper towels, making sure that they, if we use air units, that they are functioning properly, and that there's sanitizers. So I want to make sure that I have an inspection for all of those types of things. So audits, you know, are typically conducted by a FSQA within the facility. We may conduct them daily, may conduct each shift. We document these things, but I would also want to, if I'm going through a department, I may grab the supervisor or the lead for that department and say, come with me, let's walk through together. Let's make sure we together agree that, you know, GMPs are being followed. And that supervisor can then take action if there is a nonconformance found. I want to review, if I don't have them with me, I want to review the findings with the supervisor or the manager so we can take mutual corrections for nonconformance. Now, that corrective action, you know, I would also say, if you're doing these GMP audits, you know, hopefully you're doing them on tablets and you're recording them on tablets, because that makes it easy to go back and do a review. But I would want to do periodic reviews of GMP conformance, because if I've got a certain area, a certain GMP, a certain individual where we're having repeat nonconformance, then I want to determine whether or not, well, that area, is there something we need to do to change the GMP? With that particular GMP, is it not clearly understood? With that individual, did they not understand it, or is this just willful nonconformance? And then we have to determine what the appropriate action is to take beyond that, up to and including some type of disciplinary action. So I want to go back and look through that data and make sure that, because if you're going to have an SQF, BRC, if you're going to have some type of a GFSI audit done in your facility, they are going to be looking at that data themselves. So I'd want to look at it first, you know, before I get to that point. I also want to make sure that toilets and restrooms are well stocked or clean. The hand wash stations have an adequate supply of the materials that people need to wash their hands, and that trash receptacles are provided. If I'm going to tell you to use paper towels, I got to have something for you to in which, you know, you can throw the paper towels when they're used. And I want to make sure that employees are empowered to call attention to shortages or inadequate conditions. I want them to feel like, hey, I can go to my lead, my supervisor, manager, whoever, and say, you know, I come out here at 10:30 after my break and there's never any soap, there's never any paper towels, so that we can get that addressed and get that corrected. Obviously, too, I want to make sure that signage that I use is worded in such a way that it's not clear that when I say the toilet's out of order, please use the floor below. I'm not saying, you know, use the floor below, but I want to make sure that I provide an adequate location for people to be comfortable. We're asking people to leave their homes, spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day someplace that's not their home, and we're asking them to do all these things. We want to make sure they have what they need to do. We want to help people be successful in conforming to GMPs. We want to make sure that they are comfortable when they're using a toilet that's not at their home. And like I said, periodically review the GMP monitoring to make sure we look at opportunities for recognition and reward to encourage positive practices. Okay, we're all really good at finding fault. Okay, let's be positive about things. Let's get people together. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Let's get people together for a line meeting, a department meeting, an area meeting. We went 3 months with 100% GMP compliance. This is really great. Thank you for everything you do. Let's recognize people for doing things right. We used to have a program called Catch Somebody Doing Something Right. You know, it was just something we like to do. If there is a need for remedial training or education, then we want to make sure we address that as soon as possible so that we don't have to do any type of escalating discipline. Now, repeat findings may require, some changes to assignments and procedures to make sure facilities are stocked properly. And I like this quote from Dr. Deming, and he said, quality comes not from inspection, but from the improvement of production processes. So these inspections that we're going to be doing are not just saying, okay, we've done the inspection, we checked off a box. What can we do to improve the process? And if you've ever been involved with any type of like a 5S or a Kaizen event or anything like that, you'll understand these are done so that you can look at how can we make the process more effective, more efficient, and make improvements for the benefit of all. And that's why I like those types of events. So why did we have to discuss all this? Why did we go through all this? Well, because implementation of GMPs, as we talked about, are going to be effective at preventing food safety hazards, microbiological hazards, the cleanliness of the facility, hand washing and traffic control to make sure that we're not cross-contaminating. From a chemical standpoint, processes that prevent allergen cross-contact. And as I mentioned before, allergens are specifically mentioned in FSMA. Regardless of whether you're FDA or USDA, you want to prevent cross-contact. Right now, the #1 cause of recalls in both FDA and USDA regulated product are allergen cross-contact, undeclared allergens, things like that. So we really want to make sure we have an effective chemical control program. And physical, we want to prevent foreign material, especially foreign material that harms people. I couldn't find a lot of statistics on injuries. We'll do a foreign material webinar in a few weeks, but I'll see if I can find more data. But as far as recalls, it's not a high number, but certainly it does. Foreign material can lead to some rather big challenges as far as liability claims. Prevention of food hazards, food safety hazards, helps the company in many different ways, assuring the production of safe, quality foods and prevention of illness. We do not want to have injuries or illness for our consumers or for the companies that are buying our products. So if you're selling to, some of the big distributors, Cisco, US Foods, Gordon Food Service, whatever, you don't want them to have problems that they've got to deal with. So we want to make sure that we are preventing these things. We protect the company's reputation and the reputation of our brands. Ajinomoto, certainly the Ajinomoto brand is widely recognized, especially in the Asian food category, but in our Mexican food category, Jose Ole was our primary Mexican brand. It takes years to develop the reputation, the good reputation for these brands. It takes just one single recall to knock them down. So we want to make sure we protect the reputation of our brands. We do want to conform with audits that we have done, whether they're GFSI schemes or whether they're simple, GMP audits that some customers require, or customer audits. If they come in, we want to make sure that they can come into the facility, and that's one less thing that they're going to be finding. We also want to avoid legal action and liability. And anytime there is some type of an injury, illness, there's potential for legal liability, and that can become very expensive. And then finally, the last why is compliance with regulatory requirements. We want to prevent regulatory control action. If they come into our facilities and they see we're not following basic GMPs, or the GMPs that we have are not adequate to prevent a food safety hazard that we mentioned, if you're in meat and poultry, they can write a non-compliance report, an NR. There could be negative findings on FDA inspections. They rate you a 483 that has a number of different findings. So we want to make sure, and that creates more scrutiny. They're going to want to come in and look a little bit closer. So, there's a lot of things that they could do. There could be seizure of product. They could possibly seize ingredients. They could seize finished product, and we don't want that happening. It's very expensive. It disrupts our business. We don't want that happening. And there's potential for recall. And, we cover this in our recall webinar, but basically recalls are extremely expensive. and they can disrupt product flow to customers, to consumers. They can lead to liability, maybe even loss of business, cancellation of contracts, things like that. So we want to make sure our GMPs are effective enough, because they are vital for preventing food safety hazards, preventing damage to the company, and regulatory scrutiny. And with that, Scott, I've covered the material that I wanted to cover, and I really do appreciate the questions that had come in, and I hopefully I've answered them effectively. But there will be some type of follow-up if they think of something and they come up with something. Will we have an opportunity for follow-up?
Oh, certainly. In fact, we've got a good 10 minutes here. I've got a backlog of questions that I just didn't catch you at the right time, or they came in off topic.
Yeah, and
so
I kind of get on a roll, so.
Yeah, you're a slippery presenter. You're so passionate that I don't want to interrupt you in some ways. So I caught you a few, and I'm sure everyone was listening as I was trying to catch you on others. But regardless, sorry. No worries. Maybe we'll just answer a couple or get through a couple of them, and whatever we don't get to, we can follow up afterwards. So let's just see. Going back to the beginning, I have one here. Do interviewees taking an escorted tour through the facility count as visitors that need to review and sign off on GMPs?
Oh, that's great. I like that question. Yeah, I would still, and again, if we're talking about interviewees for, quality assurance, operations job, maintenance, whatever it happens to be, part of, obviously we don't want them to, create some type of a hazard. And look, I would even look at the GMPs I have for visitors or interviewees and say, maybe they don't need to follow all of these, but at least they need to follow, the hairnet, the washing hands, the jewelry, things like that. Part of but if they're interviewing for a job with me, part of the interview process is they're selling themselves to me, but I'm selling myself to them. And if they're coming in, they're looking at it and they're saying, I want to work for your company, and I present this picture of we're focused on food safety, quality, and protecting consumers, I think that presents a positive image to interviewees.
Yeah, it's an interesting look at that. Okay, so we got into a lot on gloves and hand washing, but one other aspect of that how are people managing hand washing when cut gloves are required? So wash hands before use, nitrile gloves are used over the cut gloves in the product contact activities. Wash after both are applied. Like, what are some best practices to keep cut gloves clean?
Okay, I'm assuming cut gloves, we're talking about like mesh gloves, or the types we would be using in
I would assume,
operations.
Yeah,
where we're cutting. Yeah, good question. And and I know that style of gloves have changed over the years. When I first started working in meat and poultry, it was the old heavy metal. Now I think they've gone to maybe more of a fiber mesh. And so with those, I'm going to answer it. It's been a while. So it's been a while since I've been in that environment. So I'm going to answer it the best that I can. As I recall, those gloves were issued at the beginning of the day, which means that they were collected at the end of the day, and then they were going through some type of washing, sanitizing process. Like I said, it's been a while since I've been in a meat operation like that. So, but yes, we still would want to make sure that they're cleaned and sanitized properly, because they are a mesh design. There's opportunities for materials to get into the mesh and harbor in there. So we want to make sure they're cleaned as effectively as possible. Now, there may also be cut gloves that people wear if they're opening up boxes or bags. Typically with the bags that we used, like in our operations where we made dough, those were really dull knives. So they really, they practically didn't cut anything. practically couldn't cut air with them. But I would say I would want to make sure that those are going through a cleaning and sanitizing process as well, because I want to make sure that I'm not contributing to the environment anywhere in the facility.
That makes sense. A couple of comments we'll throw in here and give you opportunity to respond in some ways. Patricia made a comment to your point earlier. APC data is not generally real time when it comes to doing the, I believe the air monitoring data when it comes for the air dryers. So a little comment on that. And then we had another comment around the validation, lots of questions on validation of hand washing, but Julie here came in with a comment. Validation hand washing that I use is APT swab of hands prior to hand washing versus after hand washing to see if the count goes under 100. Also use a hand wash timer to ensure they wash for 20 seconds. I don't know, initial thoughts or any thoughts come to mind from those types of activities with validation, Mike?
Yeah, anytime I can have data that I can utilize to say what I'm doing has been effective, I like to have data. And again, we're in food safety, quality assurance. We're kind of make decisions, or we're data-driven decision makers. As far as ATP is concerned, for hands and things like that, I typically like to use something like an APC. I don't remember if you said APC or ATP. Was it APC? Okay,
ATP,
yeah.
Yep. Or APT, I should say.
Yeah. I like APC or coliform, because these are indicator organisms of how effective your process has been. I like ATP for equipment because, again, remember with ATP we're measuring presence of organic material. So I like APC or coliform. Yes, I do. And the comment as far as it's not real time, absolutely right. That is that's one of the downsides of microbiological monitoring is I'm taking the test today and I'm getting results 24 to 48, maybe 72 hours, depending upon what I'm doing. So, I'm now acting on the past, but it still gives me some indicator. So I like any type of data that I can generate, provided it is data that's meaningful, data that I can and will act upon.
Very good. I've got quite a few more, but I want to be respectful of the time here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and cut this short. I do want to point out a couple of key dates coming up. So Mike, you mentioned a couple other courses. So again, this is our webinar series, right? We've got a lot of great topics. The next one coming up, I know there's some questions on food allergens and some of that. So food allergen management we'll have on April 15th. So we'll be getting out some information on how to sign up to attend that upcoming webinar. And then I know you also called out a couple of your other courses here. I know we've got food sanitation coming up next month, I believe. And so be sure to check in on some of our communications that come out on getting registered for those courses as well. So with that, Mike, thank you so much. Very informative today. Thank you all for sticking out for a full 2 hours, and see you next time.
Looking forward to it.